I really appreciate this.
It's our pleasure. Vanessa, why don't you start by just setting the scene for us, telling us a little bit about the American Queen and an overview of what it's about.
Okay. The American Queen, as I've said before, this is my love letter to history. It is a book that is about a kingdom that was set up in America, the only kingdom that we know about that has ever been set up in America. And they were former slaves who traveled from Mississippi through Alabama, through Georgia, through South Carolina, to get to their promised land in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina. And they owned land that spanned from one part of North Carolina to South Carolina. And they called it the Kingdom of the Happy Land. And so this is a little known true story that I have been just delighted to be able to present to the reading public, to Americans, because a lot of people don't know about this story. And so I'm happy that we're going to be discussing it tonight.
So how did you first discover the
I
Happy Land?
discovered this story from another author friend, and her name is Lisa Wingate. She had given me an endorsement on my book, Something Good. And that was the first women's fiction title I did as I came back into traditional publishing. And so I went back to say thank you. So authors, if you're out there, it's always good to go back and say thank you when someone does something nice for you. So I went back to say thank you, and I was reading another book of hers, and I told her I was reading that book, and she said, "Oh, yeah, I discovered that book from a Facebook friend." Was the information to be able to write that book from a Facebook friend. And she said, another Facebook friend told me about the Kingdom of the Happy Land people. She said, since you live in North Carolina, you might want to research it and write about it. And when I went over and I started researching this, I was shocked that she just gave me the story. So I went back to her. I'm like, now you're saying that I can go ahead and write this. And she said, yes, Vanessa, I think you're the perfect person to write this story. And so that's how I even found out about it, even though I've been living here in North Carolina for 12 years and had never heard of the Happy Land people. And so it was an amazing thing to discover. And I think there are still so many people, even in the areas where, like in Asheville, there were, when the Kingdom of the Happy Land broke up, the people who lived there migrated to areas like Asheville, Greenville, uh, uh, Hendersonville, and so there are still people even in those areas who don't know that this story existed, even though people migrated to those areas.
Yeah, I've lived here for nearly 20 years, and I am embarrassed to say I had no idea until
Yes,
I heard about your book. And I think that's true of a lot of people. And
yes.
it was in Henderson County, like southern Henderson County,
Mhm.
right? Sort of near
They
this. Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
they actually put the deed for the land that they own is located in the Hendersonville deeds office.
Mhm.
I went to that office and I looked at the deeds with my own eyes. It's there. They own this land.
Yeah. And so again, after I learned about the book and had scheduled this event, I did a little Google searching of my own and did find that there is apparently though a marker on, and I forget which road it's, I think it's on one of the state roads. If you might
Yes.
be able to, yeah, to fill that in, but there is a mark. I don't know if there's more than one, but there is a marker somewhere in Henderson County for the Happy Land. If
And are
folks
you
want to
talking
find it.
about the street sign
The
that
street
says
sign.
Kingdom Drive?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. And I stood right in front of that street sign, held up the book, and we took a picture of it. It says Kingdom Drive, and where that sign is, as you go up the street, you'll run into the Kingdom of the Happy Land. But right across from it is where Sarepta Davis's gravesite is, and all of that. And she is the person who sold the land to the Kingdom of the Happy Land people.
So I do want to hear about the book itself, and particularly Luella. But I want to dig in a little bit more to, because we talked about this a little bit backstage, to your research, and what you were able to find out about the actual folks who founded the Happy Land, and how you went about doing the research.
So one way of doing the research was, of course, you start with Google. And then I was like, okay, that's not giving me enough information. Then I discovered there was one book that had been written on the Kingdom of the Happy Land people. And it was, of course, nonfiction. And a local historian in Hendersonville by the name of Sadie Patton Smathers, she wrote the book called Kingdom of the Happy Land in the 1950s. Well, she actually interviewed descendants of the Kingdom of the Happy Land people. And she had all this information. Now, the book is small, it's about 16 pages, but I was able to find the names of Luella's children, the names of Robert's children, and I was able to find the names of just different people who lived on the land and different things that they were doing, to earn money while they were on the land. So the book was very informative. Then there was another book of Henderson County that I was able to find, and he was a local historian, and they told me that I think he recently, within the last few years, passed away. And he wrote about the Kingdom of the Happy Land people in his book as well. Then I was able to find, like I say, the deed for the office. I was able to find information on Sarepta Davis and her family, because I wanted the information on them, because she's the one who sold the land. And so I needed to understand like what would motivate her to sell land to formerly enslaved people, like right after emancipation. So I studied her as well. And so there's not a ton of information on enslaved people, because during those times we're not necessarily thought of as people deserving of being put in history. And so there were even many of the formerly enslaved people didn't even have last names. And so they had to create their last names after they were emancipated. So there was a lot that then I had to kind of glean just from what I was learning. And there was also in Asheville in the 1950s, the newspaper that you guys have there, they did a 4-part series on the Kingdom of the Happy Land people. And I was able to grab all 4 parts of that series that was done.
That's amazing.
Yes.
I knew nothing about it. I'm like I said, embarrassed that I did that was, but you described it, when we were talking before, you described it as sort of hidden history.
It is hidden history.
Like there was it sounds like there was a time, essentially in the 50s, when it sounds like just about everything that was written about it was written in the 1950s, and then it just receded back.
Right, because you have to think their descendants were still alive at that time, and they were talking about it. Mm-hmm. And so since then, there's been people who are talking about it, but I don't think it was getting the press that it really deserved. Like, I don't think people were really understanding what this meant, because in Hendersonville, you have his name is Ronnie Peppers. he goes around and he does like a monologue on the kingdom of the Happy Land people. And I met another lady who she lives in Hendersonville as well, and she's had artwork done about the kingdom of the Happy Land people. So the people in Hendersonville, I guess that they're trying, but it's not, really, it wasn't taking root. And so we're trying to make this, go national. We want everyone to know that there once was a queen in America. Her name was Luella, you know.
So, Vanessa, do you know how many people are founded the kingdom? Do you know when it first started? Yeah.
From the research that I did, when they left Mississippi, it was with 50 people. By the time they get to North Carolina, there's about 200 people in their group. However, there is this reverend by the name of Ezel Couch. He's a traveling reverend. And as he was running into people, because during this time, people were like left adrift. Yes, they're emancipated, but there's no rule book for what do we do now? How do we, survive out here? So he was running into people who were, just kind of like left out in the cold, and he would bring them to the kingdom of the Happy Land. He would basically tell them, there's people who will take care of you. And so this kingdom grew to over 400 people before, and their kingdom lasted for about 30 years.
And how big was the piece of land?
They owned about 200 acres of land.
And you alluded before to what they did to make money and survive. Can you talk a little? And I just want to remind folks, you should still definitely pick up the book and read it, because it's a very compelling novel. So, because Vanessa had to fill some stuff in as a fiction writer, and so it's definitely worth the read. But if you could talk a little bit, without giving too much away, about what you found about how the folks in the Happy Land lived, what they did.
Based on the research that I found, Luella was very much of an entrepreneur herself. She created this liniment that was to cure rheumatism, and they put it in tins and they sold this rheumatism as they journeyed from Mississippi to their promised land, and that was how they earned money while they were on their journey. So while they were on land, they also still sold the liniment, but based on the research, most of their money came from, they had Kingdom of the Happy Land teamsters, and so, or wagoneers, and they would take products from other farmers in the areas, and they would go out and they would sell it over in South Carolina, over in other towns. And so this was, a business that was very much needed before the railroad system came into place. And so, all around in the early 1900s, once the railroad system came in place, then these teamsters weren't necessarily needed as much as they were, when they founded the Kingdom of the Happy Land. But they also had other people in the kingdom would go out. Everyone worked, and they would, everyone brought money in to the king. They gave all their money to the king. He's the one who then had the money to buy the land, to build the homes on the land. They built homes. They built a church. They had a schoolhouse, which was a part of the church as well. They had a whole community, and then he would evenly distribute the rest of the money to each person. It's what we in America would call a socialistic society, but it worked for them.
So tell us about Luella. The American Queen refers to Luella, the Queen of the
Yes,
Happy Land, and that's who you've chosen to really focus on
correct.
in your novel. So tell us about Luella.
Luella, Queen Luella
Queen Luella, yes.
is a woman. In the beginning, when you meet her, she's full of bitterness because of all of the harm that has been done to her through slavery. But as she begins to grow, and as they come into their own and they build this kingdom, her heart begins to open up, and she learns to love, she learns to forgive, she learns to, and some of the bitterness begins to fall off of her. But it's not that she doesn't remember, though, because
Right.
as things pop up, she understands what she's dealing with certain people. And so, but I believe the reader will fall in love with Queen Luella just because of her spirit, her tenacity. Uh, when I was doing the research on this, it was said that Queen Luella was a very dominant force in the building of the kingdom, and so I write her in that manner. But it's also, I don't want to give that part away for people who haven't read the story. I want them to fall into, because
Mhm.
there's certain parts. I just saw one of like the bookstagrammers, or either she's a TikToker, giving a review on the book. So her thing was she read the book in a day. And so her facial expressions was everything to me, because she was, when she would come to a part and then she would go, I didn't expect that. And then and then she would go, oh, so I don't want to give certain things away,
Yeah,
because
we don't need any
even
spoilers.
because I'm writing this true story. And at first, when I started to research it, I was thinking like, oh, I don't know, how am I going to bring in the drama in this? And as I kept researching, I would go, there's the drama. Oh, there's the drama. And there is the drama. And
Yeah.
so there were certain parts of this story that was like, oh my goodness. At the beginning, it just looked like, oh, okay, so they just left their kingdom. I mean, not kingdom, they left the plantation. They journeyed through here, and then they, you know, started this kingdom. And I'm like, there has to be more to it than that.
Right. I mean, newly emancipated people setting out on the road looking for to create a new home and
Yes,
actually doing it, finding and purchasing land and making a new space.
yes,
That in and of itself is an extraordinary
absolutely.
story all by itself. Um, but you're talking about the need to sort of, in terms of writing a novel, the need to fill in, detail that you can imagine from the facts, and use
Correct.
as many facts as possible. So can you talk a little bit about the writing process and how you proceeded when you did come across those moments in your research where you were like, oh, there's the drama, there's where I need to jump off into my fiction writing. Can you talk about your process in making that work, as you were writing the novel?
Well, when I first began, it took me a while to get started, because there was so much research. And this was my first historical, I'm writing on real people. So I wanted to honor these people because they once lived on this earth. And so it was very important for me to get it right. So I, you know, I would research this, and then I would say, okay, so I need to write. And I would overthink it a lot of the times. And then I just had to tell myself, okay, you're a writer, write this story. And so I just, I had a paper that had everything lined out. And then my editor, after they looked at it, they came back with this timeline because, it's spanning almost 30 years. And so they came back and they said, okay, so this happened then, this happened. And so we were looking at the timelines, we were looking at, the journey. And I I just had to just begin to write it. And so my process was more of first just write the story. Then I went back and I wanted to then, you know, put some I had to deal with the fact of the language in the 1800s is different from the language we speak today.
Mhm.
So just write the story um, based on the facts that I found. So I sat down and I just began to write it. Then I come back through and I'm taking out words that didn't exist, in the 1800s. So I had a dictionary. One of my writer friends told me about a dictionary source to use, and it would tell me the first time a word was used in the American language. And so I had several words in there that maybe it wasn't used until 1920 or 1950. So those words had to come out because I'm writing in the 1800s. So there was a lot to do in order to bring this particular story to the reader. And I hope they enjoy it because I labored over this
Mm.
story.
And how long did it take you all together?
Well, it was 6 months of writing the first half. Then there was another 3 months of rewriting, editing, and that was the part of pulling out the words that did not exist. And so I would say altogether about 9 months.
Wow. And then how did you, we know how you discovered the story. How did you decide to focus on Queen Luella? Because she's not I mean, you're writing about other characters,
Correct.
including, the king,
Yes.
um, and other characters, but how did that come out of what you're able to find as you research, or how were you drawn most to her?
Well, here's the fact of the matter is I was already writing women's fiction. And so when I began to research this, and I saw that Queen Luella was a very dominant figure within this community, I knew I was going to focus on her because then it would become to me like historical women's fiction. So what I was already used to doing, and so I wanted to highlight the successes, the 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 issues of the woman in this book. And so even though I also deal with King William, and I loved him in this story. And so yes, we deal with King William, but the book is very definitely about Queen Luella.
And can you tell us a little bit, again, not giving too much away, because we definitely want people to read the book who have it, but can you tell us a little bit about their relationship, how they came to be together and, and become a king and a queen?
Well, William was older than Luella. They married on the plantation before they leave for their journey. They marry there, and Luella. And this is a part of my storytelling because when you're researching these characters, they're not going to tell you about their motivations, their the different things. So I place her as a person who has a hard time loving because of the tragedies that she has experienced. And so I I show you how through William loving her, it helps her to learn to love. And so I love their relationship together. And so I will see what the readers have to say about it, but I really think they fit well together.
And it sounds like, I mean, if they were able to, we know factually the kingdom lasted, for more than 30 years. And without knowing any more details than we do, it sounds like that was in large part due to them and their
Yes.
leadership.
And now there were two kings. So there was King William and then King Robert. And that's all I'm going to say about that
Okay.
because they have to read it. I don't want to give away anything of why that was. They'll they'll discover it as they read the story.
Yeah.
And that is another moment, so I don't want to give it away.
No, we don't want you to give, yeah, we don't want to give you, we don't want to have, again, no spoilers. But I think all of this is just to whet people's appetites to really get into the details that you found when you research, and also the ones that that you created to flesh this out as a novel. So we have a question from D. James. Hi, Dr. James. Who asks, how long did it take them to get from Mississippi to their happy land?
It took over a year. And so from the research, as I was researching it, it showed that they didn't leave the plantation as soon as they were emancipated. So I basically have to write a story of why did they stay and then why do they choose to leave. So when they choose to leave, they are, because it's 50 people, most of them are on foot. And they walk, you know, during the day and sleep at night, walk during the night and sleep during the day, whichever way they decided to do it, switching it up. And so it took them over a year to get to North Carolina.
Wow. You talked about their tenacity earlier, and that's a testament to that. And I'm picturing too, from what you said previously, and from the book, picturing the fact that they're picking up people along the way, that their numbers are growing.
Yes.
As they go. So
they're running into people. You have to picture during emancipation time, nobody had money at this time, and plantations have been left abandoned. And so they're going and they may be sleeping in barns. They're sleeping, sometimes just under oak trees. There's they're finding food in these abandoned plantations, abandoned farms, and things like that. But then there's people who are out there, they're wandering around just like them, trying to find just something to eat, something to somewhere to lay their head. And they run into William, who believes that God has a promised land for them. And so they connect with this group, and their group grows.
Got another question from the audience. This is from Brittany. And
Hi, Brittany.
Oh, and Brittany says, in the course of your research, did you find other historical events or figures you're considering writing a book on next?
I did, but I'm not sure if I will write the book, or I'm not sure, but I did. I almost went down a whole rabbit hole because there was another community that was built uh, over in the parts where they were not too far from them. but I kind of left that one alone because I was dealing with the Kingdom of the Happy Land people. And so I'm not sure if I will go back to it because I found some other things that I want to write about as well. So I'm not sure, but yes, I did find other things as I was researching that area.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's even more sort of not completely hidden, but not well-known history.
Yeah,
Um,
there was just a lot of great things that uh, Black people did after emancipation because they had to do it,
hmm,
because they had to find a way to survive.
yeah. Yeah. And as you say, it was not like there was a blueprint and, the promised 40 acres and a mule didn't,
Yeah, yeah, that
it didn't happen.
that
It's
didn't. Well, now, the only place that I have found that actually did happen, and
yeah.
and I am writing a story on Tulsa. That's my next
Mm,
one,
mhm.
where in Tulsa people actually did receive land, but it was land that had been taken from the Indian people.
Yeah.
So they give land to other people, but they've taken it.
They've
Um,
stolen it. Yeah.
yeah,
From the indigenous people to do. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Um,
This is a great land we're in. A great land.
yeah, it's certainly complex, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah, and it's important to it is so important to just look, even if you're writing fiction, it sounds like you're very conscientious about this, to look honestly at history,
Correct.
because we can certainly look at some wonderful things that have happened, but we have to look at the terrible things that have happened and not forget that. And so
That's right.
the story that you've told just strikes me as one that really does offer something um, very special in terms of showing us that people can come out of being enslaved and having suffered terrible hardship and still find not just the tenacity, but the hope to create something which is which is truly remarkable, whether it lasted 30 years or 5 minutes, just
Correct.
doing it, I think it was something
Absolutely.
really special under the circumstances, and knowing that um, the history of Black people in this country is not
Mhm.
entirely defined by suffering and subjugation. Like that's part of it, and we can't forget it, but also that there are
Correct.
these other moments and real, the folks in the Happy Land. I mean, the name of it alone just makes you smile.
It does.
And I don't know how easy, and I'm sure it wasn't easy for them, but
No, no.
they went into
They
it. Yeah.
there for them to build this land, they they bought land that was full of trees. They had to knock down all of those trees in order to build their homes. These were hardworking people,
Yeah.
but they had this promise of building something for themselves.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so they were willing to do it because it mattered that much to them. Because I mean, they were really self-sufficient people.
Yeah. Got another question
Mhm.
from Anna. And Anna says, is it fact or fiction that Luella always wanted to leave the plantation and had to convince William?
That is a good question. And I will tell you, that is the way I built the story, because I cannot tell you which one of them truly wanted to leave or stay. But based on my research, I drew the inference that it was William who wanted to stay, because he was the son of the plantation owner. And they were, him and his brother were well educated on this plantation. William ran the plantation. And so in the way I saw it, he would need a little bit of kind of pushing to then move on, because there was a reason why they were still there year after emancipation. There was a reason why their journey didn't start right away. And so that's the way I chose to build it, because there was no information on that particular part. And so as a fiction writer, then I have to build a story around it. And I tried to build it as close to the research that I found.
So here's another question for me. Well, we're waiting for more to come in. And feel free to go ahead and email your questions or send them to us in chat. Was there anything that surprised you? Or I imagine there were lots of things that probably surprised you, but there's anything that really surprised you that you just couldn't have guessed that while you were doing the research?
There were several things that surprised me, but early on when I was doing research, I thought that Luella was barren because there was no information that showed she had any children. But as I kept digging and I kept digging, I then discovered that she had 3 children. And I, discovered the names of her children. And I also discovered what happens to her children. And so all of those things surprised me. And so I write about it in the book. And that's all I'm going to say about that for right now.
Yeah, not to give too much away. And how was well, you said that this was the first time you actually wrote specifically historical fiction, right? And so we know that it was different in terms of doing the research. But can you talk a little bit more about any other differences besides having to incorporate the research, how you approached writing and the process of writing this book compared to your previous books? Because you've written many other books.
Right. Well, and I think I mentioned it. The other difference was the language.
Right.
And so I had to, I'm used to writing contemporary. So I'm used to just being able to say things that, we say every day. And I had to learn this in a whole different way. The other difference was that, the conveniences that we have today were not available in the 1800s to everyone. And so you just could not place a sink in a home of an enslaved person. And as you want to say, oh, they wouldn't wash their hands. And it's like, well, where did they do that? And and so there were a lot of things that I had to understand. That was research. So what was available at that time? And there was just a lot. That's why a lot of writers who, if they're writing in a certain time period, I think that's why they stick with that time period, because they've learned all of this information. So why go learn more in a whole nother era?
Right. Right. You get a range of decades down. Yes. And then, yeah.
Yes. Or the decades, but also the time and place. Like if you're writing over in London and you've researched all of that, why write about another place? Stick there because you have all that information. And so, because like I say, it was a lot of work to do the research, to be able to write this book, because I wanted it to come. I've seen reviews where the reader would come in because they are used to reading historicals, and they would say, this wouldn't have been available at this time, and the writer put it in the book. And so that scared me. And so I wanted to make sure I got it right. And so far, I have not had one reviewer say that to me because I tried my best to get it right for the reader. And so I hope and pray I did because uh, if I miss one thing, just know I worked really hard to
It
get it
wasn't for
right.
lack of trying.
It wasn't for lack of trying.
Yeah.
It really wasn't.
Yeah. Um, so we've talked about what was different. What was similar? You know, because when you were, because I know you write stories about redemption and love, you know,
Yes.
and so it sounds like in that way, this book
Yeah, I
actually
guess.
has a fair, you know, some things in common. So maybe talk a little bit about um, where, particularly for people who have read you before, you know, how does this book fit in and overlap
Okay.
with
So I
what
guess you're
Bill?
right about that. So
Yeah.
so I was dealing with themes of love or not trying to not love and then learning to love. And so I'm going to do that in a contemporary novel as well. And I write redemption stories. And so this one was more of Luella learning to trust God again because she had lost trust in everybody,
Mhm.
everything. And so it was her learning to trust again. And so I dealt with that. And I would deal with something like that in a contemporary novel. So those type of things, the themes would be the same, but it's going to be the way you go about writing those themes that are going to be totally different when you're trying to deal with historical
Mhm.
because it's the thought process, the language is just different. It really is. And so yeah.
Yeah. So we've got a question from Tanya,
Hi,
and
Tanya.
Tanya says, "Did it ever come to a point in your research that you needed to pause momentarily to catch your breath due to the sensitive information you had discovered?" Good question.
Several times.
Hmm.
And those are where I said, here's the drama. And there were several things that I found as I researched this story that if I was writing it and it was just a fiction novel, I wouldn't have done that in the book because it wasn't the way I wanted it to go.
Mm.
But these are real people.
Mhm.
And I have to let their story lead the way it actually did while they walked and lived on earth. So there were a few things. And if you haven't read the book yet, when you read it, there's you're gonna run into those moments and it's gonna make you stop and go, what just happened?
Mm.
And just understand this was their life. And so I had to bring it to you the way it lined up. And like I say, there were some where if it was just me and I was writing a novel, I would have never done this or that because I want to wrap it up
Mhm.
just nice and neatly. But I had to let the story go where it truly did lead.
Yeah. Yeah. So we just have a few minutes left before the
Oh, okay.
top of the hour. It's gone really quickly.
Yeah.
It's been such a pleasure to talk with you, Vanessa.
Thank
And
you.
I know that you've been struggling with some laryngitis, and so I really appreciate you talking with us this evening and sharing all of this. Um, is there anything you can, I mean, it's a matter of history. So, but I also, again, don't want too many spoilers from the book, but I'm curious about how the Happy Land ceased to be at the end of that 30 years. And I'm wondering if you can just tell us a little bit about that. And you already mentioned that folks then sort of, made their way to other, some of them made their way to other places, and, descendants were sort of scattered around the area.
One of the things you have to understand, and I think I mentioned a little bit earlier about the invention of the railroad. As the railroad is being built, some of the things where the people from the Kingdom of the Happy Land were making their money, they lost those things. So then they had to make money elsewhere. But then there was also a court case, and you will read about it in the book. That is another reason for what ends up happening with the Kingdom of the Happy Land. And the court case was another one where I went, oh my goodness, because I didn't see it coming when as I was doing the research. And then when I find this court case and I say, oh my goodness. And so that is also a part of the beginning of the end for the Kingdom of the Happy Land.
And I also had wanted to ask you more about the person who sold them the land to begin with, because you'd said you'd done all that research, but that'll just have to, well, maybe a conversation for another day.
Okay.
And I just want to encourage folks again to pick up a copy of The American Queen, to read more about Queen Luella and both of the kings of the Happy Land. And thank you so much for talking with us, Vanessa, about this incredible true story and your fictionalized treatment of it, and your commitment to this story and sharing it with more folks. We so appreciate it. And then before we say goodnight to everyone, just any final thoughts from you this evening?
Well, I would just like people to know, if you'd like to join my mailing list or know more about, what I have coming up, you can go to VanessaMiller.com. You can also find me on Instagram at author Vanessa Miller, and I'm on Facebook as Vanessa Miller Pierce. And I like to say, Queen Luella, she was born in slavery, but she was destined to become a queen. And long may she reign in your heart. So I just pray that as many people as possible read this story and get to know the queen who once walked, who once ruled on American soil.
Thank you, Vanessa. It was
Thank
lovely
you.
to talk to you this evening. And to everyone who's been with us, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking your time out.
Yes, thank you guys for joining us. I appreciate it.
And we hope you all have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Good night.